Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of High School Not So Much a Musical. This is the second part in our two-part series with Miss Claude Larson, who is an educator who taught science for many years and now continues to educate the youth. Be sure to stay tuned for that right after this.
This is High School Not So Much a Musical, a podcast that takes you on a ride through the peaks and valleys of a high school journey. Here are your presenters, Nitin Jaladanki and Ayush Agarwal.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but that was one of the reasons we started this podcast, was because we were kind of bored in school. But our school, it's a private school, and it actually did a pretty good job of keeping us engaged because last year I was in 9th grade and I took 8 classes, or 8 actual classes, but there was 8 periods in a day and one of them was lunch. So what they would do to keep us engaged was that you would only have a class four times in a week, so 4 out of 5 days, and every single week, one day, or every single day, one class, 1 out of your 8 classes that you took, you wouldn't have that day, and it would be the same like that for every week. So we would all and it would be asynchronous time where you could do whatever you want, or you could just work on that class material, but you wouldn't be in a Zoom meeting. So it really gave us a chance to breathe, and we could rest from staring at a screen for most of the day. But yeah, our school actually did a really good job of keeping us engaged. But as I was saying, that was one of the reasons we started the podcast. At first we started listening to a lot of podcasts during COVID because we were bored, and then then we got the idea to start our own podcast, and it's really been filling up time, so it was great.
You know what? I love that, because you are clearly on a path to lifelong learning. If you're already listening to podcasts, I love podcasts, and I find that people who listen to podcasts have a greater tendency to be lifelong learners. I want to learn about other people. I have interests that I want to delve into more deeply. So there you guys were. And then I'm assuming you were friends before you started the podcast. You didn't find each other afterward, but you're all listening to podcasts. Whose idea, out of the 3 of you, whose idea was hey, we could do this? Because one of you said it, had to be.
Yeah, Nitin was the first one who started listening to Freakonomics and podcasts like those.
I love that one.
He kind of shared with us.
Yeah, I can share about that. Honestly, Ayush knows this. The economics that we learn in school, Ayush and I both took AP Economics in 9th grade, is really theoretical. So it's all about the best case scenario. But then listening to Freakonomics over the time where we were in online school, we were able to really understand where that economics was being applied in the real world. And the episode that I talk about to almost everybody is the economics of lawns. And the average American spends almost $10,000 just caring for this piece of grass in their backyard or in their front lawn. I don't know why it's it's almost like a status symbol, is what Stephen Dubner says, because people will either dye their lawns to make it look really green, or they will buy special lawnmowers to make patterns and stuff like that. So it's such a stupid topic. It's just a lawn. But he talked about it for an hour and a half, which is what we're trying to do with our podcast. It's just taking one topic, but going really in depth into it.
Right. And you know what's funny about that is, you think about that. If somebody pointed out to that person, hey, by the way, we're going to keep track of how much money you spent on your lawn this year, and they started to see how much it was costing them, they're either going to say, yes, I want my house to look better than everybody else's, and that's worth the investment for me. Or, wow, maybe I should dial this back and broaden my horizon. But by listening to the podcast, you're right. You get such a sense. There's a niche for everybody. There's a podcast about, pick a topic, right? Oh, different kinds of tea that you could drink. Okay, I'm sure there's a podcast about that. I'm not saying I listen to it. I'm saying I'm sure there is one. Every hobby under the sun, there's probably one for everything from stamp collecting to skydiving. I don't know, but yeah, just the fact that you guys were curious enough, right? And then Nitin, were you the one who said, yeah, I want to be, we could do this? Like, was that your brainchild?
Could you please repeat that again?
I said, were you the person who originally came up with the idea of starting your own podcast?
Yeah, so it was originally my idea, but like I wasn't able to execute on it. And then, because I didn't really understand how you start a podcast, because how do you find guests to be on a podcast? What do you talk about? And then when our school dean posted about this podcast competition, that's when I was like, Ayush and I, if we're both talking about our experiences, and the reason that Ayush and I did it together was because our whole podcast that we won the New York Times podcast competition was about the experiences of different generations of immigrants. So I was a second generation immigrant by definition, and Ayush was something called a 1.5 generation immigrant, which means that he was born in a foreign country but then came to the US at a young age. So that's kind of why Ayush and I started the podcast together, and we realized having those two different opinions and just having two different voices contributing to a conversation is a lot more effective than just having one person talking. So like, if I was just talking to Miss Larson right now, it would be a lot more boring conversation because it would just be me asking one question at a time. But with Ayush and Rishi, because they're able to like voice their opinions as well, it's a lot more different of a conversation, which is why I feel it's a really beneficial that we have 3 co-hosts on the podcast.
Wow, that is so perceptive. That is so perceptive. And Ayush, I'm with you. I'm a 1.5. I'm a 1.5er. I was born in a different country, but came here at a very young age.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique experience. And it kind of like, I think this podcast has kind of opened my eyes to like a variety of different extracurricular activities in school itself, right? Because otherwise at specifically our school, you kind of have just the standard extracurricular activities. You know, you have speech and debate, you have sports, you have I guess like model UN, mock trial, and then
you
a
guys
bunch
probably
of science and math Olympiads.
Do you have theater and
yeah, we do have some of the
that
stuff, but a lot of the arts at our school are not like fully developed or focused on, just because it's like such a STEM focused school, and also we're in the heart of Silicon Valley, so obviously that shifts it to the STEM side even more. But yeah, like having this podcast, for example, is kind of a much more unique extracurricular activity in my opinion, and one that's, you know, a lot more engaging. So if you could actually talk about, you know, the importance of extracurricular activities, because a lot of kids at our school, they're so focused on academics and just like keeping their grades up that they kind of neglect their extracurriculars. They don't focus on it as much. So if you could talk about the importance of it, what you learned, the creativity aspects, the leadership aspects, etc., I think that'd be really interesting.
Okay, yeah. I'll tell you a story about a colleague, and then I'm going to tell you a story about each of my kids. So when I was teaching, we had a math teacher on our team who would come in just tearing her hair out. And one day I said, you know, you're so frustrated. What is going on? They do not even know how to, and I'm going to say math words, but I was a science teacher and these make no sense at all. But as I recall, she said something like, they can't even graph quadratic equations. And I, as a, you know, lifelong science teacher, science enthusiast, thought to myself, well, I've gotten pretty far in life and I like to think I'm fairly successful in my career. And if you asked me right now to graph a quadratic equation, I probably couldn't. So like, I wouldn't tear your hair out about that. It, you know, like that might not be where to put your focus, you know, and when I think about when you get out of school, the things that are useful to know in school, because essentially you're going to be tested on them and you're going to be graded on them, and those grades count for what school you're going to get into. I mean, I get it. It's all connected, right? But in the scope of your whole life, I tell you, you will look back on your school experience, and you will not remember most of it. And even when one day, and that was part of when I was frustrated and I didn't know what to do. And I ended up coming with this idea that I wrote down on sticky notes, and I did little lessons in my classroom. I did them every Monday for every one of my classes. They were written on sticky notes, but I sat there and I said, oh my gosh, I thought back. I was teaching 8th graders at the time. And I said, what do I remember from 8th grade science? And I remembered the name of my teacher. I remembered what my classroom looked like. And I could not attribute another fact to, oh yeah, I learned that in 8th grade. Not one. So now I'm sure that he taught me a bunch of science, some of which may no longer be true because, the whole Pluto question, planet, not a planet, planetoid, who knows? But when I realized that, I said, when everybody's so worried about the curriculum, they need to step back, look at the big picture and say, but what else? Because it's not just, let's get through this material so that we can get to the finish line in June. That's not really what a lifelong education is about. It's what a formal education is about. And I don't think it serves everybody equally. Does my physics class serve you if you're going to go work for NASA, or you're going to be a physicist, or you're going to be an engineer? Sure, absolutely it does. But if you're not going to be those things, I don't know if it serves you if you're going to be a poet, if you're going to be a fiction writer, if you're going to be an artist, if you're going to be an accountant. I don't think it's that helpful. And as long as I kept that in mind, I always knew that my impact as a teacher was more about getting them to solve problems and think than it was retaining specific information. Right? So now here's my personal story. This happened to both of my children. And they were athletes, both of them. My daughter, field hockey player, and my son, soccer team. And my son, I'm trying to think of what year it was. It might have been his junior year of high school. He had played soccer for a couple of years. It could have been his senior year. I don't recall. But he always looked forward. He looked forward to triple sessions in the summer, and he looked forward to soccer practice, and he looked forward to games. And, is my uniform clean? And he always had his shin guard. He was good to go. Until suddenly it was, you could just tell his heart wasn't in it. He wasn't playing like his heart was in it. He felt obligated. And then the coach, it showed up in his playing, and the coach put him on second string and put somebody else in his position. And at that point, he recognized this, everything has a time span, and this might have expired. Right? And so therefore, maybe I am better off handing in my uniform and using my time for something that I love, rather than feeling obligated to do something that is no longer bringing me joy. And the timing isn't always perfect. You don't always know this at the start of a season. So he was, I don't even know, maybe a third of the way into the season. And he was just kind of like, I'm out, this is getting harder and harder to go to every day. I'm not enjoying it. And he just started making excuses. Like, he's trying to explain to me, I guess maybe he thought I was going to give him a hard time about it, but the coach this and the other players that, and, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, just if this time is not serving you well, because you have to make your time serve you, right? This isn't prison where you're serving time. Your time should be serving you. You should be getting the most out of your time for the effort you invest in it. And if it's not serving you and you don't want to be there and it's optional, right? It's not like math class, you got to show up, right? If it's optional, then find something else to invest your effort and time in. And similarly, my daughter, field hockey player, her senior year, I thought, oh, this is great. You know, she's going to be on varsity. I was a field hockey player. I love the game. I love watching it. So I was always really, I was enthusiastic to go to all their sports games. But she looks at me one day, and it was summer. It was before the season had actually started, and they were doing the double or triple sessions or whatever they do in the summertime to get ready for the season. And I'll never forget. She's standing in the garage. She picks up her gear bag. So she's got a couple of field hockey sticks, a couple of balls, shin guards, mouth guard, whatever else is in there. Who knew? Water bottle. She says, "Mom, this bag gets heavier every day." And I was like, "Oh?" She says, "Yeah, I just don't want to go." And then she started telling me about she was being surrounded by girls who were kind of mean girls. Like they kind of had real attitude, negative attitude, and there was a lot of trash talk, and they were belittling some of the players that weren't as highly skilled as they were. Now, my daughter, she was first string. She was an athlete. Like she could play. But she would never say to somebody who couldn't run as fast as her, or who couldn't hit the ball as hard as she could, or who couldn't score a goal like she could. She would never make them feel less about that. But she was surrounded by people who did. And she was, she brought it to the coach's attention. The coach pretty much ignored her, never said a word, didn't address it. And she said, "This bag just gets heavier every day." And I said, "Well, anytime you want to put it down, you don't have to carry that bag." So for me, it was a disappointment. I love the game. I love to watch her play. But in the end, she ended up getting a part-time job after school. And, she appreciated that job so much. She earned enough money to buy herself a car before her 17th birthday. And she then her whole attitude changed, her demeanor changed, because she was investing her energy and time into something that was making her life better instead of feeling obligated. And I watched the parents, because I coached field hockey, I officiated field hockey, I played field hockey, and I would, over time, you watch these parents who are living through their kids' sports. Like, oh, my dad was a baseball player, so now I'm playing baseball. And, he's always the one on the sidelines who's got comments to say, or who says stuff to the umpires or the officials, the referees, whatever sport you're on and whatever officials you have on the field. And the kid feels obligated to play that for somebody else. When and I've had students, some of my students came to me, and it's like their heart just wasn't in it. And I, they'd complain, "Oh, I got to go to lacrosse practice today." Well, I played a sport. I played for 7 years, 3 years of middle school, 4 years of high school, intramurals in college. I loved it. I never complained about going to practice. I never complained about having to run a mile before we even started practice. Because I loved it. But when they would complain, I'd say, "Well, what else could you be doing with your time? Because if you hate going there, stop investing your energy in something that is not paying you back a return." So those are my two stories.
Thank you, Ms. Larson, for your insightful thoughts in the second part of the 3-part series with Ms. Claude Larson. For our listeners, make sure to stay tuned for part 3, which will be released in the coming days. Also, make sure to stay tuned for our future episodes. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.
High School Not So Much a Musical is hosted by Ayush Agarwal and Nitin Jaldanki. Narration by Samhit Padala. Music from Louis Luang Relaxation Cafe, Tune Pocket, and Infraction. If you like the show, please recommend it to your friends and family. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.